Okay, I thought this could be a fun idea for a video. These are going to be the 7 biggest rule changes in football history, in my opinion. I did make a video somewhat similar to this not too long ago where I kind of did a brief history of how rule changes have impacted eras and passing eras and things like that. But these are just talking about the rule changes itself, why they happened, and what the result of them happening were. So let's get into the list. I'm going to go in chronological order, so these aren't in order of importance, just chronologically. Let's get into it. Number 1 on the list is the rules that came from the 1932 Spartans versus Bears game. And come on, who doesn't remember the 1932 Spartans versus Bears game, right? Okay, well, in case you don't quite remember it, let me fill you in. So what happened was Spartans were playing the Bears in a game that would decide the NFL championship. It's worth noting at this point, there was no championship game. There obviously was no Super Bowl, but no championship game in general. But this game was going to decide the championship just given how things had worked out. Well, on a specific play, the Bears fullback started to run forward, but then completed a jump pass, which worked and created a touchdown. Here's the issue. It was illegal back then to throw the ball unless you were more than 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, which this player wasn't. It was an illegal play. However, the refs missed it, the call stood, and the Bears ultimately won the game. Okay, so even back then, refs were missing calls. Got it. But what's interesting about this whole situation is instead of what most leagues would do is just say, okay, we got to make sure that the rules don't get broken again. They looked around and realized this is actually a pretty popular thing that happened. People were talking about the play. It was a big game and people were talking about the game, and the NFL, which was still in its infancy, sort of said, well, you know what? Let's maybe steer into the curve a little bit. Let's have more of this stuff. So a championship game was created because of this game. They also did things like moving the goalpost in to create more field goals. They created hash marks to try and help give the offense a bit more room. Roughing the passer was created. Soon after this, you would no longer be penalized for multiple incompletions on the same drive. And of course, you were now allowed to throw the football as long as you weren't past the line of scrimmage. Now let's jump to 1949. As you might have heard some weird stats like Sammy Baugh very famously had a season where he led the league in touchdown passes. He had the longest punt of that year, and also he led the league in most interceptions. And that's not throwing interceptions, that's catching interceptions as a safety as well. A stat that if you've heard it, you probably heard it from me. It's one of my favorite fun facts. But the reason why it happened was because before 1949, you weren't allowed to just substitute as many times as you wanted. You could do it only a couple of times, similar to how soccer does it. But what happened was, so back then, you had to play essentially every single snap. You had to be out there for offense, defense, and special teams. However, since the 50s, you have now been able to have specialists. So, Tom Brady famously said the only position he could play in high school was quarterback, right? In previous football, he would have to somehow be out there on defense and special teams as well and make it work. He could probably play punter as well. He did that a couple times in the regular, in games, but he would have to try and figure something else out to stay on the field so that he could be out there on offense. Now he can simply just play offense, and that has created specialists for specific positions. Now let's go to 1977. So, okay, there is a forward pass that somewhat works. You have now better quarterbacks and better receivers and better defenders as well with specialists as opposed to having to stay out there every single play. And here is where the NFL started to do something that the NFL would very much continue to do, which was the Mel Blount rule, which in 1977, if you don't know, watch some Mel Blount highlights. You'd be shocked to learn that he was a corner because he was as physical as it gets. He would really jam receivers at the line to the point where it was just really difficult to do much of anything. Well, the rule actually isn't officially called the Mel Blount rule, it's just that's what people refer to it as. It essentially limited contact within the first 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, and once they did that, passing skyrocketed. Not just that, but ratings skyrocketed. The NFL started to become a bigger and bigger deal because people tend to like passing, and having more passing helps with offense because people like passing, and having more passing makes more ratings. And so, hey, if you can do stuff like this, the NFL is usually going to be willing to do it. This is also why usually when people talk about the greatest quarterback of all time conversations, it's usually only talked about with quarterbacks after this rule because passing was just so much easier. The stats before this just are never going to look as impressive. Number 4 on this list is going to be instant replay. Replay what actually started in 1986. There were a few examples of it happening, but ultimately they would rarely get overturned, and it wouldn't happen too frequently. And a lot of times, a lot of owners complained that the calls still weren't really getting called correctly, and all it was doing was slowing the game down. So it was actually banned in 1992, but it did come back in 1999, this time differently, where there were challenges involved, which felt like a way to have the replay be a thing, but also not have it be kind of arbitrary like it was prior to that. So now coaches, can choose to throw the challenge flag or not choose to throw it. It becomes kind of a strategic decision. Of course, now there are more plays that are just automatically reviewed, and even even expedited reviews, which has been a thing that has happened. But replay in general, we'll put that at number 4. One of the most important rule changes, I would say. Number 5, how about 2-point attempts? This happened in 1994. I think that's something that a lot of people wouldn't have guessed was so recent. That was the year before I was born that 2-point attempts were introduced. But yeah, they haven't been a thing for forever. So prior to that, you could only kick the extra point. But now, obviously, plenty of things have changed because of this, right? It's not just, well, if you're down 8, you can potentially go for 2 to try and tie it. If you're down 7, you can go for 2 and try and win it. If you're down 16, you now have a chance to potentially, go up multiple scores. And if it's a situation where you go up 9, well, now you have a chance to try and go up 10 and make it a, clean 10 points. So that way you can, as I should say, if you go up 8 and want to go for the extra point, you could then decide to go up for a clean 10 points. You probably wouldn't do it in that scenario, but maybe if you just go up 12 points, you can go for 2 to try to make a clean 14. This also turns into if you're down 14 and score a touchdown, you can go for 2 then, and then, that whole strategy. Strategy is gotten a lot more complex because of the 2-point attempts, so that's why I put this one on the list. Number 6, I'm going with the 2003 Colts-Patriots rule. Now, it's worth mentioning this wasn't one specific rule, but this was kind of really enforcing some of the rules that were already in place and maybe kind of cracking down on some of them harder. But to me, this is the biggest difference between football from previous years to football today. This has been the biggest change that we have had, in my opinion, because what happened? Well, 2003 Colts lost in the conference championship game to the Patriots, and a big part of why was the Bill Belichick defense was very physical, legal plays, but being very physical and doing what you are allowed to do and doing what doesn't typically get called. The Colts weren't a fan of that, and so they, campaigned and ultimately won the campaign to open up passing a little bit more. Again, the NFL isn't going to you're not going to have to do too much to convince them that they should make offense easier, right? They'll sign off on that. But because of this, kind of ironically, the Patriots still won a Super Bowl before the Colts did under these new rules, but the Colts ultimately won their Super Bowl in 2006, and this also created the open passing attack that has only gotten more and more this way over time as these rules have gotten less and less, but this was definitely the start of the avalanche, so to speak, and has allowed for, the passing era. So again, usually, you look at stats prior to the mid-70s, they don't look very good. You look past further, they look a little bit better. Same thing with this era. If you're comparing someone who played almost their entire career after 2003, after 2004, to someone prior to that, it's just not going to always be a fair comparison because the numbers are different, just simply because of rule changes, if nothing else. And number 7, which is a fun one, which is overtime rules. So overtime rules are actually pretty fascinating. So in 1940, sudden death in overtime was introduced, but it was only introduced for a couple of specific games, something called a divisional tiebreak game and then also championship game. So, okay, we don't want a championship game to end in a tie. Let's have this sudden death overtime. Well, that seems fun. It actually wasn't until 1974 that there was overtime in regular season games. Prior to that, everything would just be a tie if a game ended in a tie. But again, sudden death meant sudden death. If you kick a field goal at the beginning of the overtime, well, that's it. You win. And this was the case for a while. That didn't get changed until 2012. So kind of famously, I think what probably the play that really got this changed was the Saints-Vikings overtime in the conference championship game. Brett Favre famously throws an interception at the end of regulation. It goes to overtime. The Saints win the coin toss, and then there was a couple of penalties that Vikings fans still aren't over that got called that essentially got the Saints into field goal range immediately. They kick a field goal, and then that's it. They go to the Super Bowl and beat the Colts in the Super Bowl. So in 2012, they decided to implement a first possession field goal no longer wins the game. If you score a field goal on the first possession, then the other team still gets a chance to possess the football. That was the result then. In 2016, overtime was then shortened to 10 minutes, and then in 2022, kind of, I think, for a few different games, but people were still getting frustrated with these rules, right? Offense, as we mentioned, is getting more and more easy to score. That touchdowns in the opening possession are just happening more and more frequently. The biggest example that typically gets brought to changing these overtime rules was the 13 seconds game between the Chiefs and the Bills, but I think that there were other reasons why this rule finally got changed. For one thing, the following week, the Chiefs played the Bengals in the conference championship. The Chiefs, it went to overtime, and when the Chiefs won the coin toss, the crowd went absolutely nuts, which I think kind of scared the NFL off of like, okay, if the coin toss is getting this much attention, maybe we need to fix things a little bit. Also, only a handful of years prior, Tom Brady and the Patriots won a Super Bowl against the Falcons with an opening coin toss first possession touchdowns. So because of that, it was changed into playoffs in 2022 to where even if the team that possesses the ball first scores a touchdown, the other team will get a chance to possess the ball. To this date, that has happened exactly one time. That one instance was the Super Bowl between the 49ers and the Chiefs, where the 49ers kicked the field goal on their opening possession anyway, and then the Chiefs scored a touchdown. So essentially the same results would have happened with the old overtime rules. But now we will see more of this as this upcoming season, both teams will get a chance to possess the ball no matter what, even in regular season overtime games. So we will see how that works. But yeah, kind of a fun history video thing. But if this, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Those were in my opinion, 7 most important rules in the NFL era. I know that the forward pass getting invented prior to the NFL was a big deal as well, but we're just talking NFL here. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.